Former President Donald Trump was found liable by a Manhattan jury on Tuesday for sexual abuse and defamation of E. Jean Carroll in the 1990s. The jury awarded Carroll $5 million, though that figure could be appealed by the former president. I spoke with 9 News legal expert Whitney Traylor about this case just before the jury issued its verdict, about the case as a whole and what it might mean moving forward. Whitney, I know that this is just what I just said there, just kind of scratches the surface about the course of this case, but what are the basic overall things we need to know about this case?
Right. So this case, there's a few basic components and then there's some real nuances. So essentially, this is the plaintiff, E. Jean Carroll, who's suing former President Trump for defamation, for saying that her allegations that he had raped her and these other things were false and caused her damage. He said these things publicly. She hasn't been able to, she lost her job at Elle magazine and all these other things. So that's the defamation aspect of it. But then in 2022, the state of New York passed a law related to essentially the Me Too movement that said, look, if sexual assault had happened years ago, prior to any statute of limitations, 10, 20, 30 years ago, that within this year you could bring a civil claim against them. So she amended her claim and she added that sexual assault that she's accusing President Trump of from 25 years ago. So the case is really about both the defamation and the sexual assault, the alleged sexual assault.
So is it safe to kind of characterize it as the case almost increased in importance because of that new New York law back a couple years ago?
Absolutely, because in addition to that, there were a number of hearings in which there was questions if previous accusers of Mr. Trump could testify in this trial. So that was also related to this 2022, and the judge said yes. So there were 11 witnesses in total for the plaintiff, but there were 2 women who said, yes, the same situation happened to me as well, that testified during the trial as well.
So what happened during the trial? I believe it lasted a little over a week. Former president did not testify in the trial. He reportedly wanted to, but he did not end up testifying in the trial. What do we know from the actual trial itself?
Right. So there were a couple key points that came out in the trial. So the plaintiff, E. Jean Carroll, she testified for about 2 to 3 days. She was very consistent. Now, there were some problems with her case because, and no case is perfect.
With her testimony or the case?
Probably both.
Okay.
Not with her testimony being incredible, but for example, she couldn't remember what year it was. And so that is a major, if I'm Trump's lawyer, I'm beating that home in closing arguments saying this was one of the most extreme and intense situations you've ever had. You're alleging that you were raped, you were shocked, it changed your life. You've never been able to have an intimate relationship since then, but you don't even know what year it is. Right, but of course they had. Now that's one side of it. Now the other side of it, from the plaintiff's perspective, she's saying she related in great detail. She was very consistent, even though it was 26, 27 years ago. She couldn't remember the exact year. She remembered they went up the 6th floor. It was across the street from Trump Towers. It was in a upscale department store. He took her up. They were joking about lingerie, and then he's alleged to have forcibly, raped her. And so she also had 2 witnesses who testified that at the time it happened, she called them right afterwards and said, "Hey, this happened to me." Now, President Trump's lawyer said, well, who wouldn't report this? Why wouldn't you report this? Which is very shaky ground to accuse a rape victim of not reporting it, because the statistics show many rape victims don't, because they're not sure if they were at fault. There's shame. There's a power dynamic, which certainly was the case with President Trump.
And this took place in the mid-1990s when that stigma was obviously a lot stronger, and I think a lot of those barriers have been broken down in the last couple decades, right?
That's a great point. And she also testified. She's 79, I believe, or she's in that range. And she said, I'm from the silent generation. We just were taught to turn away. And you can, if there's any, the jury was consisted of 6 men and 3 women. If there's any women or men that are 50 or older, they'll absolutely be able to relate and understand what that silent generation means.
Trump reportedly, this is not public information, but he reportedly wanted to testify in this case. His lawyers said that they did not want him to. Does this partially relate back to a deposition that may have been incriminating against him?
Well, it relates to almost every time he's in front of a mic. If I'm his lawyer, and this is not bias, as the lawyer, I would never want him to testify, because one thing as a lawyer, when you prepare your clients to testify, you want them to stay focused, to stay in the lane, because the lawyers are so well prepared. They know where they want to take you. So if you deviate from your testimony, it can lead to trouble. And it doesn't mean you're lying, it just means you can easily be walked into a situation you don't want to be. And President Trump cannot control himself. And so here's a classic example. They had video deposition testimony. So what a deposition is before a civil trial, the key witnesses, the lawyers have an opportunity to question them. So, for example, if I was taking your deposition, it would be in my office. There would be a court reporter taking down every word we all say. Your lawyer would be there to object, and I would get 7 hours to ask you questions. And this is how we prepare for the case. So President Trump had his deposition taken. So it's under oath in front of the court reporters. It was videotaped. And there was some really damaging things that he said, but it's bizarre. I mean, we said that President Reagan was a Teflon president, but the things that President Trump said, and I'll just give you an example. During his deposition, the lawyer, it was a female lawyer, you couldn't see her on camera, but you could definitely hear her as a female, and he actually referenced her. And she was asking him about the Access Hollywood 2015 interview, where he said, when you're a star, you can just grab them by, the blade, and you can do what you want, essentially. She asked him about that, and he said, yes, stars for millions of years have been able to do that. And he said, yeah, you can just grab them, that's a star. And he said, unfortunately or fortunately, which is bizarre. If I was his lawyer, I would be infuriated that he said, wait, fortunately, a star can literally grab somebody by their genitals without their consent? And that's essentially what he was saying. And then, of course, the lawyer questioning him asked the proper follow-up question, which is, well, were you a star at the time? Are you a star? And he said, yes, essentially I'm a star. He then went on to say, so they were questioning him about the plaintiff, E. Jean Carroll. Mm-hmm. And at some point it came up and he said, well, she's not even my type. And so they showed him a picture from the 80s, and the picture had one of his former wives, Marla Maples, and it had E. Jean Carroll there. And he thought that E. Jean Carroll was his wife, Marla Maples. So for him to say, she's not my type, was completely contradictory. And then he started talking about the lawyer, and he said, for example, you're not my type at all. If I saw you, I hope you're not offended, I'm not attracted to you in any way. Right? I mean, this is in an alleged rape trial. This is his testimony under oath. That is completely damaging, but he has said such, and I'm not being biased, his supporters will acknowledge he says outrageous things, and it doesn't seem to sway the public opinion. It's, you either love him or hate him. And so this testimony, I thought, it will be used during the campaign trails and everything else. I mean, it was terrible, and it was under oath. It's him speaking. It's not, some kind of somebody else or a transcript. It's actually him saying it. How he does it, right?
Question based off of this. So when it comes to the case specifically, what are the potentials for a conviction here? And I would, based on what you're saying so far, and again, I don't mean this to mitigate one way or the other, it is still ultimately a he said, she said thing. Is there tangible, is there DNA evidence, is there anything firmer?
That's a great question, and in a way it is a he say, she say, but because he didn't come to testify, this isn't a criminal trial where you have the right to be free from self-incrimination. So the lawyers could use the fact that he didn't come to testify, and they did, and they said he's being accused of this. he's the one person who could deny it or whatever, and he can't come face to face, eye to eye, and do that. So that is certainly one issue. But yeah, in many ways, it is a he say, she say. But that's the beautiful thing about our jury system, because we're one of the few countries in the world that has a jury system. And this is where you and I, as normal citizens, get to look at the witnesses and actually decide, yes, this is credible. No, it's not credible. I believe this person. I don't believe this person. Because every trial I've ever had, there were different stories. You know, one person said, no, I didn't sign the contract. The other person said, yes, I did. And that's what you have to do. You have to bring as much evidence. Now, she had 11 witnesses. I don't believe he put on any witnesses. So he just, they essentially cross-examined all the other witnesses, but they didn't put on their own witnesses. So that is an issue for the jury. And I think that's something a jury will walk back with and say, yeah, he didn't bother to show up. We weren't able to look him in the eye, you know, and that may sway things. But yeah, this is a jury. It has to be unanimous. And now what's interesting is this is a civil trial. You used the word convicted,
right?
But it's really whether he's liable or not. But here's what's interesting. So in the criminal courts, when you sue somebody criminally, the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's a very high burden. The prosecution has to meet that burden. And if they don't, doesn't matter what the defense does, they have that affirmative duty. Well, in a civil trial, it's a preponderance of the evidence. So that means slightly more than not. So if I'm the plaintiff and I'm suing you, and the jury comes back, they hear a week of testimony, and they say, I don't believe either one of them. I can't tell. It's 50-50. Well, I lose because I have that affirmative duty to just prove it. And if they say, you know what, Whitney, I believe him just a little more than Bianchi, then that's all I need. So here, E. Jean Carroll, she has that burden of proof to convince a jury unanimously that yes, this happened, both the alleged rape and the defamation, and they decide okay, did she prove it? Then they decide the damages, and there's two aspects to that. Compensatory damages, what will make her whole, but then there's punitive damages, which is to punish the defendant. So those punitive damages, you know, she worked at Elle, she was a high-level executive, so the compensatory damages may be fairly significant, and the punitive damages, if they're really, you know, pissed off, those could be substantial.
Excellent explanation about kind of breaking that down for us. I guess based on what you know so far, would you say that, I mean, it's hard to tell with the jury system. We don't know, but based on that, what's your guess as to whether this ends in him being liable or not?
It's hard to say.
I know it's putting you on the spot there.
Yeah. No, and I don't mind being put on the spot because a lot of times I'll be able to watch the trial and I'll see the witnesses and I can come away and say, look, if I were a juror, I would definitely come back X. Here, I haven't been able to see, you know, that different testimony. I've been reading the highlights of it, and what it sounds like is the plaintiff was very credible, and the fact that President Trump didn't show up, I think, is harmful. That deposition testimony was not a smoking gun, but oh boy, I would have a heyday in closing argument with that deposition testimony. It's hard to say, but I would expect that there's going to be a plaintiff verdict. I think they're going to, now what they do, whether it could be on the defamation, yes, and on the alleged rape, no, but I don't think so, because think about it. If they believe her on the alleged rape, then his comments that it never happened would be defamatory. So I think it's going to be 100% all or nothing, correct, yeah.
Fascinating in that sense. What are the chances, let's say Trump is found liable, does this move from civil court to criminal court? Is there any chance of that?
No, because the statute of limitations.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's not.
I don't think.
In New York, right?
Now, what would be interesting is if there's a perjury claim. So if, and this is a problem, I'm thinking about Kwame, the former mayor in Detroit, and he was accused of all these scandals and all this, and he kind of deflected all them, but then he got on the stand and lied, and it was easily provable, and so he ended up being convicted of perjury. So perjury is, lying under oath. And President Trump was under oath at the deposition. Now, if a jury comes back and says, I believe her and not him, that doesn't mean he lied. That won't mean perjury. But if, for example, he said, I never signed the checks, and then there's 10 checks here, that could be, perjury. So, yeah. So what I forgot.
Yeah. So the question is, could this move from civil to criminal court?
So no, I don't think so. What could happen is an appeal. So either side, and actually both sides, regardless of who wins, in Colorado, it's 45 days, you have a right to appeal. And that could be the size of the judgment. That could be one really strong basis of appeal. So let me explain. When we go to trial, you go to trial court, a judge or jury decides issues of fact. Did he assault her? Did he defame her? That's an issue of fact. On appeal, what's appealed are issues of law. So one issue that I believe would be an appeal is the judge allowed two other women, one woman who said he groped her on the airplane, and another woman who said he assaulted her when she was in the, I think, Trump Towers. Those two women were able to testify, and essentially it was sort of to corroborate his mode of operandi. Mm-hmm. On appeal, what would happen is Trump's lawyers would say the judge made an error of law. He should never have allowed those two to testify because under Rule 403, it's more prejudicial than probative. That might be the legal argument. But the appellate court might say, you're right, they shouldn't have been able to testify. So then what happens is the case gets remanded. You now have a new trial without those witnesses testifying. That's why the legal system, that's why people say it moves slowly, because the appellate process, you could go up the appeals, get remanded, have more appeals. So there's cases that go on for 20 years, literally in the appellate process. That's not customary. But here, I could totally see the judge, the appellate court saying, yeah, I could see him ruling either way. They should have been able to testify or they shouldn't. But if it gets remanded, then you have another trial. But think about it. If you're President Trump, do you want to have another trial, another jury with all these allegations being thrown out there? And
you're running for president.
Right. Like, that's the last thing you want to deal with. But he has a never say die attitude as far as his trials go. I mean, he is completely litigious, has lawyers all over the country, and fights everything.
I guess this is a broader perspective that probably skims maybe the legal component of you being here, but to me, what's striking is that this is not getting more attention, and I'm in the media here, so perhaps I'm partially at fault myself, but why is this not getting more attention?
I was thinking the same thing. I mean, the claims, his deposition testimony is egregious. It's extreme. What he said in the depositions, his own testimony, not what somebody's accusing him of, was completely outrageous in my opinion. I don't know if it's just become white noise. When he says, I mean, I think back when he said there were, at the Nazi march, that there were good people on both sides. When they said about the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. All these, then he says, yeah, unfortunately or fortunately, you can grab them, by the genital. It's like, it doesn't matter. It's really bizarre and that is the political. I mean, Bill Clinton was a master deflector. Obama, he didn't even have anything to really deflect. And I thought about that today, though, as I was driving in. If it was Obama saying this at the deposition, hey, stars can do that, unfortunately or fortunately, it would be shockwaves. I mean, people would be in tears if he said that, but for whatever reason, that's not the case.
Well, I guess the perspective I'm thinking of is that everybody lost. This is hyperbole. Everybody seemed to lose their mind when he got charged with the case relating to what was it last month? Back in
the
April.
arraignment on the.
I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but
right.
We all know that Trump got formally charged. He gets booked in the New York jail or whatever. And that was basically a mistabulation of things. And then this case, he's being, it seems like, perhaps legitimately being accused here of rape. This is pretty clearly not, this isn't, well.
Right.
Why is that not getting any more attention?
Right, because the arraignment was...
The former president of the United States allegedly raped somebody. I mean, this is a big deal.
And I just think that he is a master politician, and people criticize his communication, but from the beginning, from starting the election lie, the election fraud lie, from that point on, it was because he's been so continually attacked. It's just easy for everybody to say, well, every attack then is illegitimate, and because you have January 6th, you have Georgia in the election situation, you have the arraignment for the falsification of business records. The Trump organization in December was convicted of a bunch of tax issues. They are currently under a consent decree. They got fined $1 million. All of these things have happened. These have been courts that have Republican and Democrat judges. These have been upheld on appeal. All of these things have happened. These have been charges and convictions, and nobody seems to care. This is not a political situation. I mean, the election fraud, for example, there were 80 lawsuits, more than 80 lawsuits across the country, all up and down. There was not one case even remotely close to proving there was some kind of fraud. Yet, how many million people believe that this, election was stolen? And that's a real issue with our courts. And I'm slightly getting into another issue about the ethics of the court and the importance of us as a citizenry to trust the courts, because a minority of the country trusts the president, a minority of the country trusts Congress, but historically a majority of us trusted the judges. And now if the judges are called into conclusion, so in your intro you were mentioning how Trump was criticizing even the judge. Man, that is a huge issue for our democracy, for our republic, because if we don't trust the arbiters, right, we're always going to be polarized, we're always going to have some conflict, but if we don't trust the arbiters, the ones who can actually decide the decision, if we don't believe in them, then we have no rule of law. Right? There's nobody who, if we start distrusting the judges and say, well, I'm not going to even comply with that judge's order, then we have no rule of law at that point.
Again, you have the Broncos and the Raiders, and they're both attacking the refs the entire time. Then how do you have a football game?
How can you have a football game?
And saying that they're not neutral. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Whitney Trailer, appreciate your insight on this case. I'm sure we'll speak to you as the jury continues to deliberate and we get a verdict here in the coming days. But thank you so much for joining us here.
It's good to be here. Thank you.